There you are! You monsters!
Alright folks, this is Xearrik, and I want to talk about why Xenoblade is my new Final Fantasy. And it's not just Final Fantasy, by the way. It's most modern RPGs, most video games in general. You don't tend to see AAA quality with this much care put into it, especially with RNGs. Like Nintendo, they'll do a pretty good job with most of their games, and I don't really count Zelda as an RPG, even though it kind of is. That's a different type of thing, you know what I mean, the typical JRPG stuff. And Xenoblade puts so much more care and attention into other things. What it comes down to is that it's not assembly line gaming. You can tell there's a passion in their game. I've been recently replaying both Xenoblade 1 and 2 on my Twitch channel, and I'm doing the Torna DLC on 2, and it's simply marvelous. It really is. It's immaculate. It's so well done. It's not just beautiful. I'll try to have some like footage of me walking around. The place I'm currently in won't demonstrate some of the things I want to talk about because the story's been changed, but I do want to talk about it. The attention to detail in all of it, like for instance, the little things like making it so that all the blades have American accents, while everyone else has English or some sort of European accent. That's not a coincidence. That sort of thing wouldn't typically matter in most video games. You can't point to that and say, this is the thing that's going to increase our sales. But it does. It brings in repeat customers because they can see the passion. Like an older game that can demonstrate that, Breath of Fire 3. The main character, Ryu, he starts out as literally a baby. And when they give him a weapon for the first time, he can barely draw it. When you get an encounter, he's fumbling for the weapon and he can barely draw it, where everyone else has these cool draw animations. And when you attack with him, he literally turns his head and wiggles his sword about. And as you get further in the game and story points happen that show that Ryu's progressing as a character, his animations end up becoming more and more competent, until the end where he's one of the coolest looking characters as far as his abilities. That isn't really necessary. They don't need to do that. They could have the same animation the whole time. Little touches like that are the difference between high quality, passion exuding games and assembly line video gaming, which most AAA gaming is nowadays. You tend to get that sort of passion from indie games, but not from AAA games anymore. It's so rare. And let me talk about one of the things I saw when I was in Torna. So I'm in Torna, and I basically had a Xenoblade 2 DLC appreciation stream where for like 6 hours, instead of playing the game, I just talked about really cool stuff that I'd noticed. Like, we were walking around and I was like, this rock garden is so cool. Did you know that rock gardens tend to represent things? Like the rocks in the Zen garden tend to be a thing. It's not just a random rock. They tend to be a thing that is in the real world. And I said to the chat, I was like, I wonder if these things represent real world things in the game or in-game things, such as maybe the Titans. So I Googled it and looked for a Titan map for Torna, and I found it. And sure enough, yeah, the Titans matched up. There wasn't any need for that. And then I go around talking to the NPCs, and one of the NPCs straight up said that. He was like, well, he didn't say that exactly. He says the gardens represent things in the world or something like that. He didn't really say it like I did. He said it in some way or another. I can't exactly remember. But he gave you enough of a hint if you think about it. But he didn't tell you directly. That's what I love. Like for instance, another NPC in the same area said that, oh no, let's skip past that. We'll get to that in a second. Earlier, we find an NPC. He's a crazy person. I think he's called like eccentric or loony or something like that inventor. And you talk to him, and he's one of the best inventors, he says, and making crazy technology. But he always makes it with a downside. So like for instance, he invents a megaphone that's able to amplify your voice. And he's like so proud of it, but he didn't make an off button. He invented a perpetual music box. And when our character said, well, how would you turn the music box off if you need to stop the music? And he's like, oh, why would you need to stop the music? We'll worry about that some other time. And so he's a bit of a loon, right? So, and then we go over to a glass blower character. These are like stalls outside of the main place. But inside the city, and they're like a little market with different types of vendors. And we talked to her, and she's talking about glass blowing, and she says that her master is much better than her. but he's not currently here right now. So then when we go up closer to the proper palace, one of the NPCs is like looking at the palace, and when you talk to her, she says that the palace itself tends to house some of the best craftsmen out there. Like the master craftsmen tend to live there. And I was like, hold on a second. If the best craftsmen in the world tend to live there, or in that area tend to live there, then why isn't that inventor in there? Because he's supposedly the best at his job. Oh, it's because he's a loon. They're like, nah, this crazy dude needs to go. He's not gonna be in here. The game didn't tell me that. It's just the lore of the world is consistent enough that it implies that. And that's what makes the Xenoblade games feel so alive. Everything is connected. Everything is, it's so good. In Xenoblade 2, it's actually a little less connected than in Xenoblade 1 because, in my opinion, because of the social network that was in that game and how you could link everyone together and learn all this stuff about everybody. But they're bringing that back in Xenoblade 3. But in Xenoblade 2, it still was. Like, you would talk to this person and they would say a thing. In that same town, they were talking about the Xenoblade DLC takes place 500 years before the base game. And that same glass-blowing craftsman, she references a ship that special ordered some really strong break-resistant glass for a new super fancy ship that's being built. She says, oh, it's in this new fancy ship where they don't use Titans. And I'm like, it starts with the name of the ship starts with a Mo? I lost it. I can't really remember. So they don't even tell you outright. And I was like, wait a second. What was the name of that Titanless ship that Malos was on in Xenoblade 2 base game? And I went and looked it up. Sure enough, the ship's name started with an M-O. It's a little, there's so much. The game is so alive. And you don't see that from most RPGs nowadays. Well, you do. You'll see it in some of them. But there's a difference. Like, I'm talking about a big fantasy RPG. That's why I say Xenoblade is better than Final Fantasy. Because specifically, I'm talking about big fantasy RPGs. Where it's a fantastic world. Where you have these huge, beautiful things that you don't see around the world in real life. Impossible structures, impossible things, impossible creatures, mixed in with just enough realism that it pulls you in, combined with other little tweaks here and there, the little attentions to detail that just make the world feel more alive. It's the ultimate escapism. I love a good fantasy RPG, and it's not something you tend to see nowadays. But Xenoblade is pulling it off, man. They are really pulling it off. That same rock garden, they make sure to place the lamps that illuminate the rock garden at night in just the way so that if you stand where the world tree would be in the map, or you stand if you're walking up to it from the gates, both ways, you can see the lanterns. There's only one lantern per rock, but you can see the lantern on both sides. They make sure of that. Even, it's just little, like, you know how long someone must have sit around and like, no, I want the character to be able to see it when they stand here. Let's move it an inch this way. There they go. They can see it from all directions now. Like, Loopy. That was the name of the inventor. It was a loopy inventor. I remember now. You know, another thing. There was something I forgot to talk about when it came to the accents thing. Remember how the Blades mostly have American accents and everyone else in the world has different European accents? It's to make them feel like they're separated from everyone. It's one of those little touches. But there's more than that. There's still attention to detail. Wait, spoiler. Xenoblade 2 spoiler. If you don't want to be spoiled for something, skip ahead by 30 seconds or so. I'll make it quick. Remember... Wait, here's a few more seconds. Skip. All right, you ready? All right, here we go. Remember Nia? Nia's a Blade too, but she doesn't speak with an American accent. She has a very heavy accent. Well, Nia's an exception that proves the rule. Remember that Nia is a flesh eater, and she's actually trying to be like the dead daughter of that man. So she adopted the accent as well. It's
All right,
little
remind me why you're
attention
here
to
again?
detail like that 99% of the player base won't notice that makes Xenoblade the real fantasy world that you can get in when it comes to an RPG. It feels so more alive, and you won't notice it consciously. You won't. Oh crap! I bumped the crap out of my mic. You won't. I'm so ecstatic talking about it. I'm flailing around. It's so alive, and you won't notice it consciously a lot of the time. I notice it because I am a little ridiculous when it comes to paying attention to these things to a fault. It makes me overly critical of games that are mediocre. But man, when games knock it out the park, they really do. They make you these little things. You don't pick up on it consciously a lot of the time, but subconsciously, you notice it. And it pulls you in more and more and more. And before you know it, you're lost in it, spending countless hours and being like, I love that game. I can't really point to why I love that game. So, I'm going to point to this superficial thing. That's why I love it. But I know I love it. That's what Xenoblade is, man. It is one of the best modern JRPGs out there. Because of the world itself. Because of the attention to detail in that world. Anyways, that's it for me. So let me know what you think about it. Do you have some other game that has that sort of feel to you? Some modern game that does it? I know for me personally, all AAA Western games have lost that feel, and they just feel like cookie cutter assembly line games. And I'm not interested in them anymore. Beyond, save indie games. I still play Western indie games, but mostly I just play Japanese games and different games from different nations outside of America and outside of big European nations. I'm not interested in Western games anymore if they're AAA, because they've just become cookie cutter, assembly line, mass-produced, shallow experiences where you're not going to have things like Nia speaking with a British accent. Anyways, that's it for today. I already said that. Let me know how you feel. Do you know any games like this yourself? Any other franchises maybe I didn't play, I haven't seen? I know Ys is coming out. I played Ys 8. It was really good. But it didn't seem to have that same attention to detail as like Xenoblade. It was still good. It was really good. There was a lot of cool stuff in it. And Ys 8 was the only Ys game I played. And it was a game you could lose yourself in. I don't know. I plan on playing Ys 9. And there's obviously games like Persona and things like that. But, those are too close to the real world. There's a reason why fantasy is such a big deal. Because it's true escapism. It's such a foreign world. Anyways, I really do have to go. My air conditioning is turning on, so... Noise pollution. This is Xearrik, and I'm out.